So we'll start. I'm Maddie. I want to begin by just inviting you to kind of welcome everybody to our first sisterhood class. And I know you have some thoughts you wanted to share and some greetings you wanted to convey.
Thanks, Wes. Good morning, everybody. So nice to see so many old friends and welcome those of you who are new to our study group. Sisterhood Presidents Joanne Kazarian and Dahlia Ehrenfried have asked me to welcome you as they both work full-time and they can't join us on Tuesday mornings. But they wanted you to know that Sisterhood will be offering many options to get together, both virtually and outdoors in small groups. And they look forward to seeing you all at Sisterhood programs throughout the fall and winter. We have a robust list of participants for this study group, and you'll be hearing from me or Erin Mosley each week with the reading assignment and or a message from Wes. If you're new to our group and you haven't sent us your contact information, please do so that you won't miss any assignments. And I'm sorry if anyone had a little problem this morning with the Zoom link. It was part of Wes's original message. And each week we will be sending you the Zoom link, the passcode, which is 385 Ward with a small W. And if you have any problems, just send me an email. But we look forward to seeing you every Tuesday morning. Thank you all for joining us this morning. And Wes, take it away.
Thank you, Maddie. And thank you all for being here. And want to thank Erin Mosley and Joan for hosting our Zoom call. So let me just jump into it. Let me just see by a show of hands so I know, what your experience has been. How many of you were able to read the first several chapters of the Netanyahus? Okay, so what I want to do is three parts this morning. First, I want to just get some general reactions of you to this book. I just loved this book. I'm reading it now for the second time. I just think it is such an evocative description of so many very open questions that we are debating and are unsure of as of today in America and in Israel. And I think it's just they're very prismatic, reflective questions. So I want to just first hear your general reactions, and then I want to tee up two different issues that are kind of related, big questions that this book raises about the nature of America and about the nature of Jewish history. There are two big questions, at least, that are raised. One is about the nature of America, and is America truly going to be an exception for the Jewish people or not? Maybe it's not. And there's a debate within the book about it. And then the nature of Jewish history itself. So, and then I'm going to bring you a text that speaks kind of to both questions. So that's our outline. First, to get some comments from you, quick reactions. And second, to double down on both of these big questions, the nature of America and the nature of the Jewish story. So first, I would just like to open the floor to people's reactions. What did you think of the book so far? Have you liked it? Have you loved it? Have you hated it? What are your reactions and why? I'd love maybe a half a dozen comments. Bruce Donoff.
I loved it. I had a friend who grew up just like he did on the Grand Concourse in the Bronx. I knew that history well. I suspect it's different now. There was a certain rhythm to his writing that I found very nice. The story is amazing. I met that man once in Jerusalem, and he was an amazing man. But my one question is, how come Herzl isn't mentioned anywhere?
Herzl is mentioned. You will get to Herzl. We'll get to Herzl.
Oh, okay.
You will get to Herzl.
Yeah.
But so far, so good.
Yeah.
Okay. Elise Friedman. And if you can unmute, please, Elise.
I loved the book. I first saw a review of it on the New York Review of Books, I think it was, and it was very compelling review. So I downloaded it onto my iPad and read it. I could not put it down. I thought it was one of the most entertaining books I've read in years and years. Loved it.
Hey, Lisa, I want to ask you a question about that, because in that same review, I think that was the review that I read, that basically said this is a great Jewish book for a Jewish conversation. It's an intra-family book, right? That it's written by Jews for Jews about Jews, with the implication, right? Written by, for, and about Jews. And the implication was if you were not Jewish, this would not necessarily be of interest to you. Do you agree with that assessment?
I don't. No,
Tell me why. What's your thinking?
I think it's a very accessible. Um, you know, I've heard that you know, the Fiddler on the Roof has been translated into 1,000 languages and gone all over the world, and people in Japan wonder if Americans can understand it.
Wow.
I think it's the same kind of thing. I think it's really a very accessible book. I loved it. So.
Great, Elise. Thank you so much. I'd love maybe get another 3 comments of just general reactions before we delve deeper. Anyone like to speak? And also feel free to, if I'm not calling you, if I'm missing you by accident, you can put your name in the chat. Alice Pressman would love your voice.
I like the book. For me to read 94 pages in 3 days in a busy life means I liked it. But I found the writing, I found the writing somewhat a cross between Philip Roth and Saul Bellow. And he actually, as I was reading it, I said, this seems like a cross between Philip Roth and Saul Bellows. And he mentions them, actually. So that was interesting. He makes references to family life and interrelationships as being Jewish. And in answer to your question, is it accessible to other groups? In this world today, I don't know that I cared for his reference to their being Jewish, because many of the interrelationships were family interrelationships, not necessarily Jewish. And I didn't feel that we needed to give people who have anti-Semitic leanings any more ammunition, like white privilege, the interrelationship between he and his in-laws, he and his wife. I didn't know that that needed to be attributed to being Jewish. So that would be, and then my last comment is the referral by the professor, and perhaps I'm jumping ahead, in around page 90 or so, the Israeli professor for Bencio. Right. I wondered if that would give someone who's Jewish on the committee a reason to hire him versus a reason not to hire him. The description was kind of interesting, and his opening it with, my other colleagues are ambivalent about writing because they sort of would like to get rid of him. But should they get rid of him, and should I write a review? And then you read the review because you think it's going to be this really awful review. I didn't think it was an awful review. It could be taken from many perspectives. And would it give someone all the reason to hire him? Or would he say, on my WASPish committee that I sit, is this going to be reason not to hire him? I'm the token Jew, and is he going to make too much trouble? So that really opened the door for a lot of discussion, that letter.
Yeah. That letter, the first letter and the second letter, I find every page evokes a very juicy conversation, Alice. By the way, when you say a cross between Philip Roth and Saul Bellow, I take that as a compliment. Philip Roth and Saul Bellow are 2 great writers, and if he could channel either of their, especially both of their spirits, good for him. Let me just get one last comment.
Say I didn't mean it as a negative.
Right. Just thank you. Connie, I'm going to give you the last general reaction. Connie, you have to unmute, please. You're not unmuted.
Okay. I like the reading. I have to confess that at times I found his cynical sense of humor a little tiring.
Mm.
Because it was almost the only tone. So that's, and I was trying to remember when I read Philip Roth if I felt that way. But I did feel that way reading this.
A little tired by his cynicism.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. So it feels like the book is engaging, interesting. Some might have some concerns about his tone, etc. But for the most part, he's written something that is not boring and is relevant. So I want to jump in with a question. I would just like to see by a show of hands a couple of questions. How many of you feel totally at home, safe, and protected as Jews living in America? You're totally at home, safe, and protected living in America. If you feel that way, totally at home, safe, and protected in America, raise your hand. Let me just get over. Okay. And then, just not to kill the point, but I just want to see visually, how many of you feel not totally safe, not totally at home, and not totally protected in America? Wow. Okay. How many of you, one other show of hand, I mean, and this is something that's within all of our memory because it's basically before Pittsburgh. You'll remember a time when the doors of Temple Emmanuel were open all day long. There were no fobs. You walk in and all day long, anyone could walk in off the street, no fob, and get into the building, and there was no security. I mean, that was not 100 years ago or 50 years ago or 5 years ago. That was just before Pittsburgh, which was what, 2 or 3 years ago, that we had no security, and anybody could walk in anytime. The door was always open. The sanctuary was always open. The chapel was always open. The office was always open. And no one, as of whatever it was, Pittsburgh, 18, 19, I lose with the pandemic, I've lost track of time. But pre-Pittsburgh, that's the definer. Pre-Pittsburgh, anyone could walk in anytime. And I never heard a hoot or a howl about that. And now, fobs, and now locked doors, and now the question is not security or no security, it's how much security. Do we need 2 armed guards? Do we need 3 armed guards? Do we need 4 armed guards on an ordinary day in Newton, Massachusetts? The kinds of emails that we get nowadays are, dear Aji, who's our security head, we're the morning minion, we're eating breakfast outside Reisman, and we would like a dedicated security guard to guard us while we eat breakfast on an ordinary day in Reisman Hall, outside of Reisman Hall, right? That's where we're at. So the question so I want to just invite you to marinate on this question of how safe, protected, secure do we feel? And then I want to tell you one other thing, and then we will take a look at 2 big questions that the first several chapters raise. How many of you have been in Israel to Beit HaTefutzot, the Diaspora Museum in Israel? It's in Tel Aviv. So Beit HaTefutzot was just redone. So the old Beit HaTefutzot told a story of the Jewish people, which was every Jewish community outside of Israel, with drop a footnote, with a possible exception of America, had the same trajectory. Jews moved there. They got accepted, secure, comfortable, rich, powerful, famous. They felt home. And in 100% of the cases, the story ends badly. They're murdered, they're massacred, they're expelled, their blood, libeled, and it ends with expulsion and death in every one of these places where the Jews felt at home. And that was the Diaspora Museum. And it showed you every sad story of a Jewish community in exile that was at home and that ended in blood. And the question of the old Diaspora Museum was, is America going to be any different? Is American exceptionalism an exception to the general rule about Jewish history? The Diaspora Museum today does not tell that story anymore. It has been completely redone. Shira and I were there with the Boston CJP trip in July, and it doesn't even have the name. It's changed its name from Beit HaTfutzot, the Diaspora Museum. It's now called Anu, which is Anachnu, which is we. It's our story, and that whole edge that you can't be at home in the Jewish community outside of Israel is just gone. It's just gone. So the question is, so the Jewish people and we here in Newton are debating kind of two questions. How much at home can you be not in Israel? And is the American story a different story and a more optimistic story, a more hospitable story, etc.? So with that, I'm gonna direct your attention, if I can, to a few pages on the question of the nature of America. And then I'm gonna show you a page or two from the Haggadah, and then we'll look at the page or two about the nature of the Jewish story and Jewish history. And throughout, I'm gonna just want your comments, your voices, your questions, your thoughts. Turn to page 29, if you will. And this is, you'll remember he has this evocative frame about the Church of the Assumption. Do you remember that? That this church in New York, in Pelham Park, was called the Church of the Assumption. And the question is, what assumption do you make about America? And in this very evocative chapter, he outlines two very different assumptions. And he would experience them as conflict every day of his childhood education. The assumption of his American history teachers was America is a land of promise and possibility and potential and upward trajectory, that the arc of history is long, but it's bending towards justice, right? So I want to read this to you because I just found it just so evocative. Let's see here. Look on page 29. Growing up, my weekday mornings began at another mid-block pile of dignified brick, PS 114, where the gaggle of old maids and young widows who taught there would yell in loud, panicked voices about how America was a country where all men were equal and where probably all women were equal too. A country where we could say what we wanted, where we could be what we wanted, where we could worship whatever God we pleased, and where we could even worship no God, because the law's equal protection covered atheists too, and even agnostics, if they were citizens, were free to choose their future. He then contrasts that with, he would go, and then he says, let me just read one other paragraph about this. I'm now on page 30 and 31. It was the differences in history between his secular studies and religious school that got to me the most. The history of my regular schooling was all about progress, a world that brightened with the Enlightenment and steadily improved, a world that would continue to improve illimitably, so long as every country kept trying to be more like America, and America kept trying to be more like itself. The past was merely the process by which the present was attained, and the present was merely the most current stage of the American superlative, to be overtaken by tomorrow's liberation and capital spread until the ultimate transfiguration of world history into world democracy. The meliorist account knew no bounds. Like the country itself, it could only grow, it could never end. It was open, expansive, and exhilarating. Okay, we're going to get to the Jew, what he got in Hebrew school in a minute, but I want to pause there. First of all, how many of you got an education like that about America? American promise, American exceptionalism. Okay, and how many of you spent many years, I just want to double click on this point. I just find this so evocative. How many of you spent many years believing that? Now, in 2021, how many of you still believe that? Right, and how many of you believe that the opposite of that is actually true today? Right, so I think one very evocative theme in this book is the nature of America, American exceptionalism, and the American story. And of course, we're going to contrast it with the Jewish take that he got in his Hebrew school about America and American story. But I just first, I want to some new voices who grew up believing it and believed it and still believe it. I'd like to hear from some new voices about their thinking. If you grew up believing it, believed it, and then even post 700,000 dead from the coronavirus, still believe it, would love to hear your voices, some new voices. Anyone? David Kopelman.
I still do believe it, but I find that there's some troublesome occurrences now in our country. I'll just list them. One of them is the rising anti-Semitism, or the new anti-Semitism, which is anti-Zionism. That's the new brand of anti-Semitism, highlighted by the BDS movement, which is gaining a lot of traction in our universities. Black Lives Matter, which was founded by some anti-Semites and has an anti-Semitic tone to it, to its charter. The shooting in the temple in Pittsburgh, the anti-Semitic pronouncements by the Squad, Aisha, Talib, and the other one, the Squad, including, by the way, our own representative from Massachusetts, Iona Presley, who's a member of the Squad. The failure of Nancy Pelosi to denounce the Squad and knock them off the Foreign Relations Committee. If those same remarks were made about blacks, they'd be gone in a second. And the rise of the neo-Nazis in Massachusetts that we've seen evidence of. So those movements are concerning. I don't think they're going to overturn the wonderful reception Jews have had in America. It probably is the safest place for Jews to live, one of the safest places in the world. But those things are concerning to me. And
okay, so one thing that challenges this narrative of ongoing and unrivaled progress and promise, and the past is merely the process by which the present was attained, and the present merely the most current stage of American superlative, etc. One thing that challenges that is anti-Semitism from the left and from the right, both of which are robust and ongoing. What else? But still, you hold by this narrative. Who else holds by this narrative that, yeah, we got problems, but I still believe in the exceptionalism of America? Does anyone else who believes that would like to comment? Linda Leffert, we'll love your voice. But you have to unmute, my friend. Linda, if you'll please unmute, we couldn't hear you.
I just don't think it's quite that black and white. I am, of course, very distressed about all those things in our country and with respect to Jews that you mentioned. But if somebody said to me, okay, if you could live anywhere else in the world and we would move you there and settle you there with your whole family in a lovely home in our best neighborhood, where would that be, and would I go? And do I wish I were there? And the answer is no. So yes, there are a lot of very troubling things. You know, those of us the age of most of us have seen worse, we've seen better. I think there's a huge problem with our government, and there's a lot of work to be done. But you know, I don't know any place that I would prefer to be. So I think we just need to do the best we can do to make it better where we are.
Can I want to talk to those of you who still believe in the American exceptionalism. I have a question for you. You know, the language about like the country itself, it could only grow, it could never end, it was open, expansive, exhilarating. What do you do for those of us, so our biggest America supporters, our biggest America lovers, how do you process the grim milestone that we're in the shadow of now, that on Friday, 700,000 people died of COVID, and since the vaccines were widely available, all of those deaths were eminently preventable. And it was some sickness in the soul of America that prevented, you know, thousands upon thousands of Americans from getting coronavirus and dying. They just willfully refused to get the vaccine. And if you read, if you read or listened to the Daily yesterday, there's this horse medicine. I can't pronounce it, but it's a horse medicine. It's meant for horses, and the Daily talked about how that's flying off the shelves. And there's this whole counter narrative that vaccines are bad and we should take horse medicine. And those are the people dying, which is why coronavirus has now eclipsed the influenza of 1918 and 1919 as the deadliest pandemic in our history. So I guess my question to you, for those who believe in the American story of exceptionalism, what do you do with the sickness in our soul that finds expression in the fact that, you know, hundreds of thousands, millions of Americans are still not getting the vaccine for conspiracy reasons, political reasons, toxic reasons, and that they themselves are dying because of it? What does that say about our country, and what light does that shed? Would love to hear anybody. Some new voices, please. Some new voice. Anyone else who hasn't yet spoken who would want to address that question? Paul Kalis.
Yeah.
By the way, Mazel Tov, Paul, and Zoe's bat mitzvah.
Thank you.
Truly beautiful on Shabbos.
Yeah, well, the clergy was fantastic. Everything was just wonderful. I think one of the things that's happened in the United States is we've lost our positive heroes. It's unbelievable for me to understand why Donald Trump is a hero to so many people. But he seems to talk to many people who are disadvantaged and some people who are advantaged. But the heroes on the other side, on the left side, just don't seem to cut it right now. And I truly believe that most of the people who are resisting the vaccination are going to come around, because they do see people dying. It may take a little, it's taking longer than it should. But I'm afraid that our current president does not influence people as strongly as Donald Trump does. As much as I can't stand Trump, he knows how to reach the people. And I do believe in American exceptionalism. In fact, I love America. It's there's no other place on earth like it. And it's just a very, very difficult situation.
Right.
And if some of our heroes, who is a hero now in New England? It's Tom Brady. Tom Brady, not a politician, it's Tom Brady. If he could, if people like him could be convinced to publicly announce that he has taken the vaccine and he could get other people to. So it's a matter of cooperating with other people. And I don't know if Tom's a Republican or a Democrat. It doesn't make any
Right,
difference.
Okay, but so here's where I want to just put a pause on the American conversation as taught by its 1950s and 1960s most enthusiastic teachers. I will just say that the gloss that he talks about from his American history teachers, it really spoke to me when I was a kid growing up. I mean, I bought that. I always told my kids, you live in the greatest country in the history of the world. When I went to college, I was an American history major. I graduated from college believing America was the greatest country in the history of the world. And I was 21 when that happened. But as a 60-year-old, it's just hard for me to think, what was I thinking? How did I not see, not only, not to get into, a whole diversion, but there's also the whole story of slavery and Jim Crow and mass incarceration. That's also a very important, and caste. It's also a very important part of the American story that his Hebrew school, that his high school teachers or grade school teachers at PS 114 just never addressed. Like the fact that slavery was real, the fact that Jim Crow was real, the fact that mass incarceration was real. That is an important part of the story. But white Jews like us, it wasn't our story. And it was better here than in the graveyard of Europe. And so we didn't see it. We didn't see it. I want to bring now, but let's talk, but I'll tell you who did see it was his rabbis back in the 50s and 60s. So I want to read this and ask you what you think. And then I'm going to bring in a page or two from the Haggadah. So page 31. To the gaunt, shuffly rabbis who were force feeding me these recapitulative chronicles of Jewish suffering and loss amid the pallets of stale matzah and tarnished samovar parts. American history was synonymous with Goyish history. America wasn't the New Jerusalem that my public schooling implied. Rather, it was the newest incarnation of Rome, Athens, Babylon, Egypt, Mitzrayim. It was diaspora equals galut, and its villains, Pharaoh Nebuchadnezzar, Antiochus, Hadrian, Titus, Haman, Khmelnytsky, Hitler, Stalin, et al., weren't individual men perpetrating individual evil of their own accord, so much as they were all just avatars of Amalek, Israel's original enemy from the deserts. American Jews were just waiting for an Amalek of their own. Or as they put it when I was growing up, could it happen here? And all of you must have grown up with that question, could it happen here? And no one needed to define it for you. If you grew up like I grew up, if you grew up with a Holocaust obsessed history as I did in my mother's milk, could it happen here? It needed no definition. We all knew what it was. So that is what he gets from his rabbis. I'll just look on page 32 and then we'll pause. Just wait, the rabbis promised, it's coming. You don't need to define it, right? Our history, the rabbis used the plural pronoun even more than Dr. Morse, was more like a chronology of trauma, as received and determinative as the commandments from Mount Sinai. The course could not be altered, the force could not be resisted. Carnage was the Jewish destiny, and those of us who didn't survive could at least be sure that those who did would interpret our deaths as foreordained and sacrificial. Okay, so that's the narrator, Reuben Bloom, right, talks about listening to American Promise in the morning, and America is just Mitzrayim. America is just Amalek. It could happen here. It will happen here in the afternoon. And he says at the end, I don't know that I ever resolved this conflict. I think I just matured through deciding on my own course of reading as much as to changes of hormones, etc. And I want to say, and then I want in my comments, I think that the very fact that we need to have 2, 3, or 4 armed security guards at your synagogue, Temple Emmanuel, in Newton, Mass, in leafy Newton, that your compatriots don't feel safe eating breakfast outside of Reisman Hall unless there's an armed guard, that's today, suggests that this debate is not just fiction. So let me invite some thoughts, comments, and questions from any and all voices. Happy to hear from anybody now who would like to share what you think about this debate of young Reuben Bloom and the extent to which that debate, America is different, it couldn't happen here. What are you talking about? America is just another Mitzrayim. It is happening here. How you process that debate. Anyone? Susan Kopelman. And please unmute.
Can you hear me?
I sure can. Thank you, Susan.
I think one of the factors is that this country is supposedly values freedom. And with freedom comes a lot of danger. And there are a lot of, I think, groups and ideas that are allowed because we say you're allowed to be free and we'll deal with it. So, and I think that you also have to take into account that everyone and every country is flawed. And so I think it's the direction the country takes with the flaws being recognized that you have to evaluate. And I sort of think it's not the looking back and seeing where we started from. I mean, you have to acknowledge the slavery concept, but we are trying to move forward. Look at all the conversations that go on. And I'm sort of a little upset with all the negativism that America gets right now.
So Susan, I totally get that and feel that, but how do you process, and you know, as somebody who just loves this country so deeply and wants the positive energy, how do you see 100,000 of your citizens taking horse medicine instead of the vaccines and actually dying from it?
Is that my fault?
No, it's not your fault, but I'm asking you it. How do you uphold positive energy about our country in the face of that kind of dysfunction?
Well, what I'm saying is it the country's fault? This is I think this is a result of the freedom that people have. People are flawed also. And I think that people can make lousy decisions for their life and for the lives around them.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, if you were imprisoned by rules and structure that the government told you you can do this, you can't do this, you can do this, you wouldn't have that problem. Right. Is it worth it not to have the problem and not being able to think?
Okay. Okay. I wanna bring into the conversation a text that is familiar to us that will bridge these two questions about the nature of the American story and the nature of Jewish history. So Joan or Aaron, if I can ask you to share the screen. There are two texts. This is from the Haggadah, and it's specifically from the Haggadah that Mishael Tzion and Noam Tzion wrote. Okay, so I'm going to read this in Hebrew and in English. This is from the Haggadah, and it is B'chol dor v'dor omdim aleinu l'chalotenu v'hakadosh baruch hu matzilenu miyadam. In every generation, enemies will arise to destroy us, but God saves us from their hands. Okay, and give me a minute, Aaron, before we look at the next page. But just to frame this as a bridge connecting these two pieces of the conversation today, when Reuben Bloom reads Bencio Netanyahu's scholarship, he finds the following. So Bencio Netanyahu, and by the way, this is really true, that the son of Zion and the father of Yonatan Netanyahu, the hero of Entebbe, and the father of Bibi Netanyahu, who was the longest serving prime minister in the history of the state of Israel. Bencio Netanyahu got a degree, in the 50s from Dropsy College in Pennsylvania, which doesn't even grant degrees anymore, but he got his degree from there. And in the course of his work, he wrote a dissertation on what we used to call the Spanish Inquisition of 1492. And here's his piece, which is here's his on one foot, and it's a gazillion pages. But as Joshua Cohn relates it in this book, here's what Bencio Netanyahu says, that there's a really interesting question about the Spanish Inquisition, which is that Spain was killing and expelling and massacring and torturing who? Jews who had converted to Christianity. They were doing that to Christian converts, people born Jewish who gave up Judaism. And Bencio Netanyahu asked, why is that? After all, if Jews converted to Christianity, good. So Christianity won. So your numbers are increased. You've won the debate. Declare victory and go home. Why torture, kill, and expel these new converts to Christianity? And Bencion's answer is that the Spanish Inquisition were the first people to say that Judaism is not a religion, a set of beliefs that you could believe or convert out of. No, Judaism is racial. Judaism is in your blood. Judaism is a people, it's racial, and you can never convert out, and we don't want you. And so what follows from Bencio Netanyahu's big opus about the Spanish Inquisition, Spain and Portugal, by the way. And if you go to Portugal, Shira and I and the kids went to Portugal before the pandemic. In the big, like Lisbon, there are town squares where the Jews were taken out and burned to death in this period. And these were converts to Christianity. So what Bencio Netanyahu comes up with, as Joshua Cohn relates it, is that the 1490s are the same as the 1940s. Let me just say that again. The 1490s are the same as the 1940s. 1492 equals 1942. That is, you can draw a straight line from what happened to the Jews in Iberia in the 15th century, how they were punished and killed for being Jewish, and they couldn't convert out to save their lives, to what happened to the Jews of Europe in the 1940s, Eastern Europe and Western Europe, Jews of Poland and the Jews of France and the Jews of Germany. Eastern Europe and Western Europe alike a graveyard, because 1492 equals 1942, you can't convert out, Jews are a race and they need to die. And Bibi's father, Bencio, that's his entire point, is that there's this straight line. And if you had to find one line that would take up his theory of Jewish history, it's B'chol dor v'dor omdim aleinu l'chalotenu v'hakadosh baruch hu matzilenu miyadam. Every generation, they arise to destroy us. So Aaron, can you look at the next page, please? Screen share the next page. Okay, so this is from the Haggadah. In every generation, our enemies seek to annihilate us. And what you have on one page is you see this, you see a whole bunch of hatred of Jews. And what Bencio Netanyahu does, you see 1391 Spanish Inquisition, riots and forced conversions, 1492, Jews expelled from Spain by Ferdinand and Isabella, et cetera, et cetera. And ends in the Wannsee Conference in Berlin that decides on the final solution, that all of these lands hate the Jews. And so this is what Bencio argues And this is what the rabbis who taught Reuven Bloom in school were arguing. And here's what he says. I'm just going to read this on page 33. That the public school teachers were right and the rabbis were wrong. America was the most exceptional exception. I myself was waking proof of its dreams, my accumulating higher degrees, evidence of its higher beneficence. And if there were still some flaws in its laws or policies or propaganda, then my vocation, the vocation of history, would issue the corrective. That was how I felt in that busy, flourishing period between the war I tried to forget and the counterculture I didn't anticipate. So the rabbis of his grade school, when he's a kid, tell him, when you look at this picture, so to speak, don't be shocked that you have 4 security guards with guns at Temple Emmanuel in October of 2021. Don't be shocked. We're no different. We're just the next chapter. Okay. So I wanna just read one piece from the Bencio Netanyahu scholarship, and then open this up for conversation. And by the way, and Joshua Cohen. So one last thing, to state the obvious thing, which obvious thing should be stated, the debate that young Reuven Bloom, the young narrator, when he's in grade school, has between his public school teachers who talk about American exceptionalism and the Hebrew school teachers who talk about it could happen here, it will happen here. This same debate is now relived when he's an adult, asked to be on the selection committee and asked to review Bencio Netanyahu's scholarship. So, and the same way that as a kid, he rejects the rabbis and sides with the American exceptionalism premise, he now does the same thing. So I want to just read this and then we'll open up for comment. On page 40. Let's see. He talks about history and theology. History treats time as a chain of happenings that we humans set into motion by our own free will. Its first lesson is that a first cause does not exist, because as my teachers put it back in public school, we learn history in order to learn how to change it. Theology, however, treats time as a chain of changes that are visited down upon us by the will of God, who makes things occur for reasons of his own, who brings about alterations and modifications in the fabric of existence, not haphazardly, but according to a mythical scheme or pattern that can't be humanly interpreted as anything but miraculous or as punishments we've earned in retribution for our sins. This, at least, was what I was taught by the rabbis, who were quite capable of insisting that the 1490s and 1940s were identical. So, what do you, and so he rejects, Reuven Bloom rejects Bencion's essential thesis, because Bencio draws the straight line and Bencio sees the pattern that the Haggadah sees that you just saw on the screen that Aaron showed. And Bencio says, see, look at all those times, look at all those chapters, look at all those countries. Simple history. They hate the Jews, they kill the Jews. What are you missing? And Reuven Bloom, the narrator, says that's not history. That person doesn't deserve to be teaching in a history department in a university. That's theology. So I would love your comments. What's your voice on that debate? Would appreciate anyone's comments here. David Kopelman. And if you could please unmute.
One distinction is that all those horrible historical events had the support of the tacit or implicit of the governments of those countries. The Holocaust had the support of Nazi Germany. The Inquisition had the support of Queen Isabella and the rulers of Spain and Portugal. Whereas in this country, the Tree of Life incident in Pittsburgh is an isolated incident. I guess, which is why we have security guards. But it doesn't have the support of the government. It's not part of the government doctrine or mantra to eliminate Jews. So there's a certain amount of security that is afforded to us by the fact that these fringe elements that I had referred to earlier, which I hope remain fringe, but
Right.
those fringe elements don't gain traction and support from our government. That's the distinction. And that
Okay,
gives us a certain amount of security.
okay. Thank you, David. Bruce Donoff. Bruce, if you can unmute, yeah, thank you.
How do we prevent those fringes from becoming mainstream in the government? Does anyone worry about what's going on in our country now? You know, if you go to Tulsa, Oklahoma, if you go to Fargo, North Dakota, it's not Newton, Massachusetts.
Mhm. Right. So I guess, but the question that Joshua Cohn is teeing up when he talks about the reception of Bencio Netanyahu scholarship is, do you feel that this is history or is this theology? Do you feel that we can be different because there's no metaphysical law that determines that Jews are going to suffer here? Or do you feel that, no, there is a pattern, B'chol dor v'dor omdim aleinu l'chalatenu, in every generation, people arise to try to annihilate us. By the way, and not to talk politics, but this kind of connects with David and Bruce's comments. You all know that Iron Dome was passed, but if you read Bret Stephens' piece in the Times, he talks about how the so-called progressive wing of the Democratic Party was very opposed to refunding the Iron Dome. And the only impact of that position would be innocent Jews killed in Israel. In other words, the progressive legislators support dead Jews. They support dead Jews. They support spilled Jewish blood because Iron Dome is entirely defensive. It's entirely defensive. It doesn't wage war. It stops bombs aimed at civilians from landing on civilians. And that's what incumbent progressive Democrats wanted to not renew. So I think that's a heart attack. That's just a heart attack. The notion that there are legislators who are paid by the US government, who are duly elected, who want dead Jews. The point is we want as many Israelis to die as possible. And so let's not renew Iron Dome. That, right? And so I guess it depends how you see that, depends perhaps how you fall down on this issue. Are they Amalek? And is Amalek coming here? Or is this history and our job is to advocate, etc.? This is not inevitable. But this is a very current and real issue. How you see America and how you see Jewish story. Arthur Waldstein. And then John Boyd.
I just wonder whether the answer to the question that you're asking isn't yes.
Say more, please.
And whether it's both history and theology, and that we are in a peculiar situation where it's some of both. Some of our theology, in a way, is history, and some of our history, in a way, is theology.
Right. And let me ask, if you were, Arthur, if you were to say that the answer to that question, history or theology, is yes, it's both, does that make you feel more hopeful about the American Jewish story and the Jewish story, or less hopeful about the American Jewish story?
I'm laughing because the first thought I had, Wesley, was that the answer to that is both.
Okay.
But I mean,
could you spell that out, Arthur? Could you tell us more? How, in what way? By the way, on the merits, not that it matters, I happen to agree with you. I thought, as I'm reading the book, I'm thinking Bencio Netanyahu is 100% right. That this is that the theology in the Haggadah is actually history. That the reason that theology resonates is because it's borne out by history, so that it is history and theology. So I agree with you on the merits. The question is yes. And then I guess I'd like you to spell out, how does that make us more hopeful and how does that make us less hopeful?
Well, what I was going to say, Wes, was that if I think about it a little more, I find myself being less hopeful. That
Hopeful.
the theological aspect of the history begins to win out in my mind.
Mhm.
And it don't look so good.
Okay, so I wanna end this class on an up note. Okay, I want to just say that the Jewish people have never been stronger. For most of our history, we didn't have a pot to piss in or a home to call our own, and we were vagabonds. We didn't have a homeland, and we didn't have a home, and we were persecuted. And if you look at that page from the Haggadah, the second page that Aaron showed you, that was the Jewish story. Where are we going next? Where are we going next? Where are we going next? Okay. And so if you want hope, it's not perfect, obviously. In Israel, it's not perfect. In America, it's not perfect. The fact that you have to have fobs to get into our synagogue, not perfect. The fact that we have to have 2, 3, or 4 armed security guards every ordinary day, not perfect. But I will say this, we've never been better or stronger as a people. We have an incredibly wonderful homeland. By the way, there's a magnificent piece. It will make your soul smile. Written by Danny Gordis about Israel as the land of intersections. Google it. If you want hope, legitimate hope, real hope, authentic hope, read Danny Gordis's piece about the intersection of Ahad Ha'am and Theodore Herzl, which is an intersection in Tel Aviv, and it's also the land of Israel lived out. That will make you feel hopeful. And so we have a strong Jewish homeland. We have a strong, not invulnerable, but we have a strong Jewish community in North America. So throughout all of Jewish history, it's been much worse than it is today. It's not perfect, but we've never been better. We've never been stronger. In Boston, we're not invulnerable, but we're strong. And Israel is obviously got a lot of complexity to it, but it's incredibly strong. So maybe the fact that it's history and theology also means that while we're not invulnerable, we are growing in our strength. So here's what I want to say. I think this book just raises tremendously evocative issues about not just Bencio Netanyahu and the world which made Bibi Netanyahu and Yoni Netanyahu possible. But in the end, I think this book is so powerful among American Jews because it is a mirror. It's a mirror. And it invites us to look at what do we believe about our country? What do we believe about our people? What do we believe about the American story? What do we believe about the Jewish story? And it tees up, the best thing in the world is a really rich question. And this tees up really rich questions. So for next week, please read the next few chapters. We still have to cover chapters, I think, 3, 4, and 5. So maybe make sure you've read through chapter 5 for next week, which is Alice Bressman talked about the review of the recommendation who did not like Bencio Netanyahu. Make sure you've read through page 94 for next week, and we'll pick up with that. And I just want to say thank you for this class. I just love this class. Missed you guys over the summer and the holidays, and it's so great to see you guys again. See you next week. Thank you. Bye.